Now, turning to our program, I am pleased to welcome Milwaukee Press Club President Mary Ann Lazarski to introduce our panelists and speaker. Thanks so much.
Well, good afternoon. It's good to see everybody here today. Got a lot going on. Today is the second of multiple programs in conjunction with the Milwaukee Press Club, WISN Politics, and WisconsinEye, featuring candidates running for election on April 1st. 2 weeks ago, we heard from Judge Susan Crawford, and today we will hear from Judge Brad Schimel. What's been great about these programs is that we can have people from both sides of the aisle coming with respectful and fair conversations. And so our goal is to provide a space where candidates can speak openly and equally. By doing so, we continue Rotary and the Press Club's traditions of thoughtful dialogue and civic engagement. After Judge Schimel answers questions from our journalists, I will moderate questions from the audience. There are cards on your table, so you can write down your questions, and then please bring them to the AV table right over here to Aaron and Melissa before 12:50 p.m. That's before 12:50. Now I would like to welcome our journalists to the stage. Alison Dirr from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Charles Benson from TMJ4. And Matt Smith from WISN Channel 12 News. Judge Schimel began his career as an assistant district attorney for Waukesha County in 1990. In 2006, he was elected Waukesha County District Attorney and was subsequently reelected twice. Judge Schimel left the courthouse in 2015 after being elected Wisconsin Attorney General. He returned as a circuit court judge presiding over Branch 6 in January of 2019. He and his wife Sandy are proud parents of 2 adoptive daughters and reside in Waukesha County. Please welcome Supreme Court candidate Judge Brad Schimel.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Thanks to the Press Club and our panelists for being here today. I wasn't sure when you asked President-elect Laverne, when you asked guests to stand up, I wasn't sure what to do. I'm technically a visiting Rotarian, but you didn't introduce any of those, so I'm glad I stood up for the guests. I've been, I don't know, 20 years-ish with the Waukesha Noon Club, and we've collaborated with you. Pat's been out to talk with us about the Guatemala project, and we've sent some people down there too. So thanks for all your work as the lead club sponsoring that great project. So I've been 35 years, as you can do the math from the introduction. I've been 35 years as a public servant. For 35 years, my only client's been the people of Wisconsin. And I have an approach to public service that comes from what my parents taught me growing up. My brother and sister and I were all taught over and over again in our lives, you should always try to leave things better than you find them. My dad was my mom was first our Cub Master for Pac 516 at Walker Elementary School in West Dallas, and then my dad was eventually Scout Master for us, and we'd go on a canoe trip, and we'd land, and we think we're ready to rest and relax after paddling all day and portaging, but no, first thing we're going to do is we're going to clean up this place. We're going to find any garbage within a 10-mile radius and pick it up. And then we cut our lumber, cut our wood for cooking our meal. And we'd always have to cut wood for the next group coming in case they landed when it was pouring rain or something. And everything we did in life always focused on leave it better than you found it. And I have found that to be an extraordinarily good match for a public servant. We all know the difference between a public servant and a bureaucrat. Bureaucrats don't help anybody. They just are looking for the time when they punch out and go home. Public servants focus on how do we make the community we serve better, and that has been my approach to public service now for 35 years. I did not plan to run for the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Would be the furthest thing from my mind through all of my career. I enjoy my work as a Waukesha County Circuit Judge, and I frankly didn't think I would. I liked being an advocate for all those years. I liked being in the courtroom arguing for the cases. I know that District Attorney Laverne can appreciate that. And there's good days and bad days, but it's never dull. It's never boring. And I always thought being a judge might get kind of boring. You know, they're filtering all the information to you. You don't get to go to the crime scene. You don't get to involve yourself in anything. You don't get to talk to the victims except when you're on the record. You don't get to do any of that stuff. And I thought I would not like it. And it turns out I love it. The judicial role is truly rewarding. It has perks to it too. I have much more control over my schedule than any time ever before in my career. But it's good, honest, hard work, and I enjoy it. So I was planning just to do that. But in 2023, our Supreme Court race took a turn that I'm not comfortable with. Unfortunately, a lot in the public are. The notion that judges might start telling people how they're going to rule on cases while they're campaigning. It's not the first time it happened, but it became more pronounced. And we saw polling that said a lot of voters like it that way. I've been trying to convince people that that's not the best for the future of our nation or state. And I try to do it to the average person who doesn't get why a court race would matter to them. Why does this apply to my life? I try to put it in terms of something maybe you've heard me talk about on the campaign trail. Imagine you've gone to a Brewer game and you bought your first $17 beer and you're ready to enjoy the game, but there's a problem. The umpire comes out wearing a Cardinals jersey. You're not going to stick around and buy a second expensive beer because you know how this game's going to end. Instead of wearing black, like the neutral uniform of an umpire, they're wearing one of the team's jerseys. This is going to end badly. Now, you're going to get up and leave. Now, there's a Cardinals fan that came in for the game, and they love it. They think this is great because they're getting a win tonight. The Cardinals fan isn't going to like it for long because now baseball is no longer about the athletes on the field. It's about the umpire. That's not a game worth watching, right? Now, it's baseball. Find another sport. Go to minor league baseball. You can find some other pastime. But when you have someone on the court, particularly the Supreme Court, wearing a jersey for a team, there's nowhere else to go. That's it. That's our justice system. And we have three branches of government, and I like to liken it to a three-legged stool. One of those legs is the justice system or the judicial branch. They hold up our constitutional republic. If you take one of those legs away, we all know what happens to a two-legged stool. This is a problem. There's plenty of politics. The legislative branch, the executive branch. I mean, heck, you can't turn on a sitcom show at night without seeing politics. Your kids' cartoons, a lot of them have politics in them. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. There's one place that should be a politics-free zone. That's the courtroom. And unless judges and particularly justices can approach this job with a commitment to be objective, with a commitment to be impartial, with a commitment to approach their work with humility, respecting the roles of the other branches of government. Unless you can do that as a judicial officer, you have no business putting on the robe. And that's the end of this story for that. If not, our republic won't be one for long, because it won't be about legislators that you elect in one of the 99 assembly districts in Wisconsin, for instance. It won't be about what they say the law is based on your vote and your support of them. And by the way, those are small districts. You can throw them out of office if you don't think they're doing right by your district. You can run against them. And they run every 2 years. You can do it relatively quickly. The Supreme Court, it's a 10-year term, the longest term in Wisconsin government. And it's statewide. Good luck from your community making that change at the Supreme Court. You don't want I'm trying to convince people, I hope you agree. You don't want 4 justices on the Supreme Court to decide what the law is. The law should be decided by the branch to which that was assigned. So with that, I'm going to end my filibuster so our moderators can get going on what they have in mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking our questions and for being here today. I did actually want to start with your baseball analogy. You have welcomed an endorsement by President Donald Trump. You had an event with his son, Donald Jr., last night, and said you'd be part of his support network. I wonder, why should voters believe that you wouldn't be wearing a Trump jersey if an issue involving him or his supporters were to come before the court?
I enforce the law. As a judge, I interpret the law the way it's written. It is hard to go out all throughout the state of Wisconsin and get your message there on your own. You have to have a support network yourself to help deliver that message. I don't endorse political candidates, but there's nothing wrong with political candidates supporting judicial candidates. That's perfectly legal. It's just not a two-way street. I've campaigned now almost 16 months, 15 and a half months already, traveling the state of Wisconsin. I've campaigned in all 72 counties. I've gone to voters in every corner of this state, and most of them over and over again, taking my message directly to the voters. I'm running to be a justice for all of Wisconsin, and I'm running to enforce and uphold the law the way it's written by the legislature. Nobody that's supporting me is getting any kind of a pass, and anybody that's not supporting me isn't getting any kind of a black mark. You come to my courtroom, I will focus on what are the facts of this case and what is the law.
Judge Schimel, thank you for your time. Good to see you. You're probably familiar that the Wisconsin Supreme Court recently, in a 4-3 decision, decided to accept a lawsuit from Governor Tony Evers, challenging some of the ability of the legislature's most powerful committees to override the executive branches. This case will likely be decided whoever gets elected, so it's in front of the court right now. So the 4 liberal justices agreed to take the case in an emergency order. The 3 conservatives did not. But Justice Hagedorn wrote that the petition raises substantial questions about the proper roles of the executive and legislative branches under the Wisconsin Constitution. So you just mentioned a little bit about this. What's your view on the court's role in deciding these boundary lanes between the branches, especially if one side's the Republican and the other side's a Democrat?
Well, the answer is found in the Constitution and the laws, not in which side's a Republican and which side is a Democrat. You've identified the very reason why we need to take court races seriously. And unfortunately, from November 5th, we had about 3.4 million people voted. If we get 2 million for this April race, that's a huge turnout. So almost 1.5 million fall off. Don't see why this race matters as much. But this race actually in some ways matters more, because if the legislative branch goes outside or beyond their authority, someone can take them to the court and sue them, to restrain them, to put them back in their sandbox, so to speak. Same thing with the executive branch. There is a check on them. And the two check each other, because obviously no legislative act can become a law unless the governor signs it. So if they want to get something done, they're going to have to work together, and they both have to approve it. There is no similar check on the court. There's nowhere to go on this question. The Wisconsin Supreme Court is the final word when it comes to deciding what Wisconsin law says or what the Wisconsin Constitution says. So a question like this, which branch, legislative or executive, has a particular authority? The Wisconsin Supreme Court is going to be the final word on that. There's no appeal to the federal court. They don't have jurisdiction to decide what Wisconsin law or Wisconsin's Constitution mean. So people should take this race much more seriously than they do.
So let me then just follow up on that, because Vice President J.D. Vance tweeted out last month that if a judge tried to tell a general how to conduct a military operation, that would be illegal. If a judge tried to command the attorney general in how to use her discretion as a prosecutor, that's also illegal. And then he said, judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. Do you agree or disagree with the Vice President?
Well, the question in there is whether it's a legitimate power. That's the key issue. And judges can only decide the cases before them. We don't get to go out in the public and notice something we think's out of line and point it out and say, hey, square it up. So no, we don't, judges don't go tell generals what to do when they're battling a war. But if there is something that is unconstitutional or contrary to a statute, someone could sue. Let's say this is a war that was never properly declared. Someone could come to a court and sue over that. I doubt that's going to be the Wisconsin Supreme Court, but that's certainly possible. In that way, if there is a ripe dispute in front of the court could tell the executive branch whether what they're doing is lawful or not.
Could or should?
I guess it's their proper role. I guess you could use the word should there too. Yeah.
And Judge, I want to ask you about some news of the day. Chief Justice John Roberts just put out a rare statement late this morning in a feud between a judge and President Trump calling for this judge's impeachment, who ruled against him. Chief Justice Roberts said in this rare statement, "For more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to a disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose." I'm curious your response to Chief Roberts speaking out and on President Trump calling on the impeachment of a judge who ruled against him.
I haven't seen anything on the story from what Chief Justice Roberts said today, nor do I have any idea what this is about. I don't know. I've had this thing going on between my day job and campaigning. I've got 2.5 full-time jobs going on, but I haven't seen that. Sounds like, frankly, I think there's been way too much talk in recent years about impeachment overall. Voters make choices. Federal courts are different, they're appointed, but generally voters make choices, and ideas about impeaching people that are put in place by the voters, that should be used much more rarely. I think that word's become too commonplace, but that's a matter to be decided by a dispute in front of the court. And I guess in his role as Chief Justice Roberts can have opinions, and certainly being Chief Justice, he can't prejudge cases, but I don't know when he's talking about whether an impeachment is proper or not, impeachment that hasn't been filed yet, apparently, when he's talking about whether that's proper or not, maybe that's dangerous because that could end up in front of the court. I don't know.
And following up to somewhat what Charles was saying, bringing it back down to the state level, do you see the courts in this day and age as a referee between the Democratic governor and the Republican-controlled legislature?
A referee. Well, usually the term that's used is they compare him to an umpire calling balls and strikes. But yes, that is part of the responsibility of the court when there's a dispute between 2 of the branches of government over which one has a particular power or authority. Part of the role of the court is to be there to resolve those things, of course.
I wanted to ask you too about some comments that you made today on Jay Weber's program.
Okay.
You had talked about the Milwaukee.
Thanks for listening.
You had talked about the Milwaukee absentee ballots and said that's what we need to do, get our votes banked, make this too big to rig so we don't worry that at 11:30 in Milwaukee they're going to find bags of ballots that they forgot to put into the machines. You referenced 2018 and 2024. And you said a little bit later, I don't know what happened. I don't know if there was fraud there. I guess I was curious, if Milwaukee's absentee ballots are reported late at night on election or on April 1st, will you accept those results?
I accepted the results in 2018, even though they found 3 bags of ballots way late in the evening that suddenly appeared. So yes, I accepted the results. They counted all the ballots. I lost that race for re-election as Attorney General. I accepted it then. I would always accept the results of the election. The point I'm making with those comments to Jay Weber this morning, well, 2 points. One is I'm running in a turnout race. When you go from 3.4 million to 2 million voting, the key is get your side motivated to go vote. And that's why I'm urging people. Early voting started today. Go out, get your ballot cast. Could we have a blizzard on April 1st in Wisconsin? Yes, we could be holding shovels that day. So get out, get it done. And the other point I was making was about voter confidence. The legislature is responsible for making laws that dictate how voter integrity is to be ensured. We need to enforce those laws the way they're written. That way, we have the best chance that all voters will be confident in the outcome. We can't continue to have circumstances where people don't like the outcome. And there have been both Republicans and Democrats in races across America who've cried foul that something was cheated or defrauded. We must do the best we can to limit that because it's critical. It's critical that not just the candidate accept the outcome of the election, but voters accept the outcome of the election.
I guess I did just want to follow up if I could. In 2020 and again in 24, there's been a lot of discussion just about the state law that hasn't been changed, right? Where you can't start counting absentee ballots until 7 a.m. on election day. And so that's a huge contributor to why you end up seeing Milwaukee's votes reported late at night. I guess I was curious, as you reference, the potential for fraud or finding bags of ballots. I mean, this is a process that's pretty well reported, well documented in Milwaukee. Can you explain why you would continue to say that there was potentially fraud there?
Because it's an issue where people are asking me all the time, how are we going to guarantee integrity in this election? And I tell people by following the rules, and then I tell them, here's the best way to make sure your vote isn't stolen. Go use it. That's the answer.
Let me just follow up a little bit on that because when we look at Wisconsin in 2022, Wisconsin voters chose a Democratic governor and a Republican U.S. senator on the very same day. In 2024, voters decided for a Republican presidential candidate and a Democratic U.S. Senate candidate. They both won on election.
Yeah.
So are you confident, because we understand voting laws and rules potentially can end up in front of the Supreme Court, are you confident that Wisconsin's voting laws are fair and accurate? You kind of smiled there.
That's not my decision to make.
But maybe if they come before you.
Well, you asked if they're
currently
fair.
With what we have right now.
That fairness decision, the legislature weighs what's the right policy. What's the policy that makes the most sense, will have the most likelihood of success, the least inconvenience to voters. They decide those policy calls. That's not for the court. The court's role in assessing a statute usually is to assess whether the legislature had a rational basis to pass that law. We may have to look whether it impedes on a constitutional right. That's a possibility, but generally deciding whether that rule is fair, that's not the court's role. We are to look at the law. It sounds weird for me to be saying courts aren't about fairness, but when it comes to assessing a statute, that's a policy aspect, not the court's role.
But when you look at those last two elections, does that imply, is the premise there that the system is working? We can elect Republicans and Democrats on the very same ballot.
Well, absolutely. In Wisconsin, absolutely. It goes back and forth. There are all sorts of things you can point to, third-party candidates that influence races, other things like that. But yeah, Wisconsin is, I've heard some describe it as the purplest of purple states. I don't know if that's correct, but certainly we are a state that is very evenly divided. We are ultimately, when you get to big turnout elections, you're disputing over a very small percentage of persuadable voters. Most people have kind of decided which way they're voting well before the election. This judicial race is a little different because we do have a lot more that are undecided in these spring elections. So there's a lot more opportunity, but also challenge. You've got to get your message to them.
You said your role and the role of the court is to enforce the laws the way they're written. I'd like you just to expand on that a little bit. And I guess let's just use the example of abortion, since that's been talked about a lot in this race.
Oh, I hadn't heard.
So when you say enforce the laws the way they're written, does that mean enforcing the 1849 law? And how does your thought process work on this question of whether there's a constitutional right then to an abortion in this second pending case?
Well, first off, the 1849 law, oral arguments occurred over 5 months ago. That case has been submitted to the court since November 11th. This decision will be made before the end of this term. I mean, that's the requirement. The court heard it. They need to resolve, they get this case done. By the time I take the bench on August 1st, that's going to be decided. We'll see how I feel about the decisions that's issued from that. I understand the arguments in the case. The court's got to make their decision. I have no idea who's voting which way or what's happening.
How would you vote?
I didn't read the briefs in that case. I listened to some of the oral arguments. I wouldn't stand here and say I'm prepared to render my opinion on that case without having heard the arguments and read all the briefs. I don't have time for that.
And then just walk me through your thought process on enforcing the laws the way they're written and how that would apply your thinking to this question of a constitutional right.
Well, the word abortion doesn't appear in the Wisconsin Constitution. We can all agree on that, right? So that means that if there's a constitutional right to abortion in the state constitution, someone's got to come up with an argument that infers that from other language in the Constitution. That's something that's going to have to be reviewed from the briefs. This case isn't even at the Wisconsin Supreme Court yet. It's still in the appellate court level. So obviously I haven't read the briefs. I don't know what the arguments are going to be in the Wisconsin Supreme Court for that. I'll review that when it comes. But generally, the law is made by legislators. That's what ultimately the U.S. Supreme Court decided in the Dobbs decision is this issue belongs to the states and the voters. I think this issue should be decided by the voters. Since it's not clear in the Constitution, it should probably be best decided by the voters.
Just to continue on the 1849 law, you had said during the debate last week that kind of what you said today, that the court has not issued a decision yet. You said, but I think they're playing politics. They're waiting till after this election to keep the 1849 law a live issue. Could you expand on that a little bit? You know, what tells you that they're playing politics with this?
Well, they held off for a long time before they had oral arguments till after the November 5th election. And now oral arguments were completed over 5 months ago. And here we are, no sign that the decision's coming as we wait for the April 1st election. So it's a live issue. I get asked about this in, I don't know, 80% of the media interviews I do. They want to know what I think about the 1849 law, and I have to remind them that's already been argued in front of this court. And I wonder, where's the decision? I don't know. I don't know why it's taking this long. But you know, circuit court judges have 90 days from the time all the final arguments are submitted to issue our decision, or we're expected to answer for it. There isn't a similar timeline on the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
As you know, early in-person voting begins today, and you have said that you would welcome an endorsement from President Trump. As Alison mentioned yesterday, you were at an event with Don Jr., his son. Do you feel it's necessary to get President Trump's endorsement to win the election? And I recognize there are prominent Democrats on Susan Crawford's side. We do see that Eric Holder, I think, is here today, President Obama's.
I think Governor Walz is here today.
And so I recognize both sides are doing this, but you got to agree, a presidential endorsement has a bigger weight to it. Do you feel it's necessary to get it to win?
I've got to get my message to conservative voters from November 5th. That's the bottom line here. This is a turnout race. Who can get their conservative voters or liberal voters, who can do this best from November 5th to April 1st? That's the bottom line. if President Trump ends up endorsing in this race, that could be a helpful factor in getting conservative voters. He won the state. It's almost every win in Wisconsin is a narrow win statewide, but he won the state narrowly. It could help me get my message out to voters who don't vote in every election. This is about getting out the low and mid propensity voters. I'm going to bet that most of you are very civically involved. I get the same thing at my Rotary Club. I bet everybody in the room would raise their hand and say, I vote in 4 out of every 4 elections. The voters that don't come out from November, where they vote in the big one, they don't come out, the lower mid propensity voters, that's who we need to reach. That's where door knocking, that's where retail campaigning like I'm doing. That's where this pays off.
Let's mark the tape here that I'll be the first bringing up Elon Musk. Is
Not
that
today, not the first today?
no today, right here? Yeah, so
Here in this room,
right. So isn't that sort of an implied endorsement here? The millions he has spent, and then people who will say, you know, how can you objectively sort of look at anything that could come before the state Supreme Court that would have Elon's name attached to it, given the amount of support he has given indirectly to your campaign?
You know, there's another question that I wish we'd see an answer in the media too, and that now my opponent has now spent $18 million, her campaign, on television ads. And I haven't heard anybody demanding to know from her, where did this money come from? It doesn't have to be reported till next Monday. $18 million. Her campaign has received well over twice what I've been able to bring in through donations to my campaign. And the last campaign finance report, 97% of my donors are people who vote in Wisconsin. Almost half of my opponent's donors don't vote in the state of Wisconsin because they can't. They don't live here. I don't see enough of that. I get asked at almost every media interview, what about Elon Musk? He's supporting you.
Well, it came up in the debate.
I don't control what Elon Musk does. I don't communicate with him. Neither anyone on my team has ever talked with him or his team about what he's doing or what messaging he's doing. That's actually illegal for a judicial candidate to do, or any candidate to communicate or coordinate with outside groups. We don't do that. I don't control it, but I welcome the help because I've got to get my message to those low and mid propensity voters. And I'm aware that among the investments he's made has been an awful lot of door knockers going around the state, and that's critical.
We've all seen the TV ads. They're pretty intense. Some are pretty nasty on all sides of this. This question actually comes from my 4th grade daughter, who said to me unprompted the other day, Dad, I hate these political ads. Yeah. And I said, why? And she said, because they are inappropriate and just mean. But I think this hits at a larger issue for voters in a judicial race. I'm curious, I mean, has this fallen beneath the dignity of the Wisconsin Supreme Court? And in part, is your campaign, is Judge Crawford's campaign responsible for that?
Talking about someone's record, that's fair game. That's not mudslinging. As long as you're telling the truth about their record, it's not mudslinging. I'll offer you to you, though, my opponent hasn't told the truth about my record. And if she were, I wonder why over 3/4 of the elected sheriffs in Wisconsin are publicly endorsing my campaign. They're putting their name and their face on the line to support me. And with over 3/4, that means I have an awful lot of Democrat elected sheriffs supporting my race. I have bipartisan support. I have the support of all of the major law enforcement organizations in Wisconsin. They represent over 16,000 frontline law enforcement officers. Those organizations are all backing my campaign because they saw the truth about my work. Now, my opponent runs a commercial that says, Brad Schimel lets domestic abusers walk. Doesn't give you any detail, just puts a name of a case. And I'm not going to say the man's name because I think his name's been dragged through the mud enough with a statewide TV commercial. But this man, Bill, is his first name. Bill served our country in combat. He came back from combat with PTSD, bipolar disorder. And like many warriors, they don't feel safe to ask for help with psychological problems. They feel like it makes them less of a warrior. And so he dealt with his mental health problems with alcohol. So bipolar disorder, PTSD, alcoholism, as you can imagine, his domestic relationship wasn't going very well. And yes, they'd been arguing, and one night the argument got so heated, she got upset, she went running down the street. He went after her in the car. She wouldn't get in the car voluntarily, he forced her in. And the neighbors saw it, and they called the police. The police came, they asked him what happened. He said, I screwed up, and he admitted what he did was wrong. They arrested him. He went to jail for the next few days until he could post bond. When he did post bond, fast forward to about a year later when the case came before me for sentencing. And here's the truth that my opponent doesn't want you to know. The victim stood up in the courtroom. I'm quoting from the transcript, which we've provided to the media. I'm quoting from the transcript. Well, I can't get the exact quote, but very close. She said she'd never seen anybody work harder in her whole life, never seen anybody work harder to improve themselves than Bill. Never seen anybody work harder to show their love for someone else than Bill did. And she said she never thought she would say something like this, but him getting arrested was the best thing that could ever have happened to him and to their family. And she told me she was 8 months pregnant now. She's having their baby in a few weeks. She didn't have to tell me, I could tell. But she shared that and she said, Judge, if you put him in jail, you could undo all of the great progress he's made. There's not a judge on the planet, Judge Frankie, there's not a judge on the planet that would have put that man in jail that day for 2 misdemeanor charges, by the way. Instead, I thanked him for his service. I congratulated him on the kind of redemption story the criminal justice system prays for every day. And I wished him best of luck on probation, which he completed with flying colors. That's the kind of dishonesty that's happening out there, Matt. And my ads, I'll hold them up. I'll hold them up to the truth. They're backed up with the receipts. That is false, what she said. And I can go through all of them if you'd like.
To the larger issue, quickly, I mean, are you comfortable with these judicial races essentially turning into political races? I mean, after the debate, we saw 5 of the 7 justices before the cameras supporting one of their candidates.
They have freedom of speech to support a candidate, political speech to support a candidate or not. Both sides in the majority and the minority on the court have an interest in either maintaining their majority or changing that majority so they're in it. I don't know what you want me to say. Should I be banning them from supporting one or the other of us? You know, my opponent got in the race, and within, I believe, days, all 4 liberal justices on the court right now endorsed her for the court. I haven't had any formal endorsement from any of the conservative members of the court. I'm running for the voters of Wisconsin.
I wonder, just to continue on the ads, obviously the Supreme Court is not sentencing anybody, and the criminal system is only a part of what the Supreme Court justices take up. So I wondered if you could talk about, how are all the ads we're seeing, which focus so heavily on sentencing and on the criminal justice system and kind of the jobs that you're both doing now, how is that relevant really to deciding who would be a better Supreme Court justice?
Well, a couple things. One, it reflects on your judgment, on how well are you able to understand your role, how do you exercise your judgment as a judge. The cases we've cited, and they're just a couple of many that we found that I think demonstrate really poor judgment on her part. When she conceded at the debate several times that you have to weigh the offender's rehabilitative needs and their character, and that can be stronger than the need for public safety. That's absolutely true. But I disagree with a man who did what he did to that 5-year-old girl, and that girl had to testify about it, and the jury convicted. I disagree that she set that balance correctly, that the public safety part of it should have weighed stronger. And I know that from reviewing the transcripts from that sentencing hearing and reviewing the complaint and some of the facts of the case. It's like I said in the previous question, it's fair game to talk about your opponent's record. It's part of her record.
Sure. I guess, how does that play into, though, the cases that would come before the Supreme Court? You talk about kind of her judgment, but if you're not talking about, if you don't have, right, a criminal case before you on the Supreme Court, what does it matter, right? If you're looking at a civil case or you're looking at an election case, what does the criminal judgment mean?
It reflects how you exercise your judgment as a judicial official. It's plain. It reflects another thing. Frankly, it exposes another falsehood in her claims on her campaign. She tells you in ads and speeches that she was a prosecutor that locked up dangerous felons. And as I called her on at the debate, that's not actually true. She never did that. I have been that. I spent 25 years as a frontline prosecutor in Waukesha County. I was the guy who got called at 3 o'clock in the morning to go to the crime scene, countless times. I was the shoulder that victims cried on. I held their hand through the process. I stood in the courtroom before juries and argued as their sword and their shield to get justice for them and justice for the community. My opponent is appropriating a part of my history that she has no right to. She never did that, but she's doing it to pander to voters and to try to sway them with something that's not true about her history.
Voters will have to decide a constitutional amendment on the ballot in coming up here. You decided to go public with your vote on that issue. Why did you want voters to know where you stand on this constitutional amendment?
I chose to answer the question. It was asked of me at the debate, which way are you voting? And while I acknowledge that my personal views on the issue are utterly irrelevant to my role as a judge, I don't see any harm in me disclosing. I could have said, well, you have no right to ask that question. I don't think it's a difficult one to answer. And the answer is, I'm going to vote yes for a constitutional amendment because I believe that's, as a private citizen who gets one vote in the polling place, I believe that that is a good way to protect voter integrity.
And can you clear up any confusion on election night? Will you or won't you be playing bass guitar on election night?
I think there's going to be live music, yeah.
I asked this question of Judge Crawford when she was here a couple weeks ago, and I'll end by asking you the same reversely. Given how political this race has become, I'm curious, what does it mean to you to be the conservative candidate in this race?
It means I have a conservative judicial philosophy. It means that judges don't make law. That's the simplest way to put it. We are to apply the law as crafted and passed by the legislative branch. The difference between a judicial conservative and judicial liberal is judicial liberals believe in a much more activist approach, where they believe their role as a judge is to form the law into what they believe it should look like. That's what being the conservative in this race means. And it does happen that political conservatives tend to side with judicial conservatives or support them, and vice versa with judicial liberals and political liberals, usually being allied in those things. I'm not sure that's always true. I'm not sure that will always be true, but that is how it's shaken out right now. And by the way, this election for Supreme Court, come on, this is far from the first time that it's gotten politically charged. In 2023, most expensive court race in American history at that time. This one's going to go past it. But that was, or somebody said already. I agree. It's already gone past it, apparently. Most of that money's not in my hands, but that is a reality that we didn't invent in this race. But in 2023, the conservative candidate refused to take direct transfers from a political party, from the Republican Party. His opponent did take those transfers and got almost $10 million. You can't compete. I said that I would take all legal and ethical contributions in this race. It buys you nothing but my commitment that I will follow the law. I wish personally that this law would get rescinded. I think it's doing damage, but I have to compete in the world that I'm in. Just like I tell a lot of people with early voting, I said, many of them prefer to vote on election day. I say, you know what? That's great. If you want to vote on election day, good for you. But we should take advantage of all the tools that are available. And one of the tools that's available is you can start voting before election day. And that banks your vote. It makes sure you don't take the risk that it's blizzard on that day or that you break your ankle Monday night and are sitting in the hospital and don't get to vote. Whatever the case, we should use the tools that are legally and ethically available to us. Legislature, I hope personally that they take another look at this and decide whether we really think this is a good idea to let unlimited contributions come into political parties and they get transferred to candidates.
Okay, I'd like to thank our panel of journalists for their questions. Okay, this question follows up on Allison's question.
Okay.
Does it bother you that there has been so much emphasis in this campaign on criminal sentencing when this has very little to do with the cases before the Wisconsin Supreme Court?
This is part of our history. I spent 25 years in the criminal justice system as a frontline prosecutor. Certainly part of my history. My 4 years as Attorney General touched on criminal issues a lot. Certainly a part of my history. And I spent 3.5 years in the criminal division as a circuit court judge. It's all there, part of my history. I only ask that you tell the truth about it. And I think it's remarkable that in 35 years, most of it being involved in the criminal justice system, my opponent and her allies haven't been able to find one case where they can actually tell the truth about something I did wrong in a criminal case. All of the cases that they cite from my work as a judge, every one of them, I followed the recommendation of the DA and the victim. I didn't fall short on one of those cases. All the cases they cite from my work as a district attorney, each and every one of those is a case where the judge, that they're saying I was weak as the prosecutor, every one of them, the judge didn't even impose as much as I requested as the prosecutor. So how you can say I fell short doesn't make sense. I think it's fair game. Like I said, I just wish that we could have some way of enforcing that the ads be truthful.
How do you square being a, quote, justice for all, end quote, while also supporting the 1849 abortion ban laws and anti-trans equality initiatives?
I don't know where that second part came from. I don't have any position on who people are, who they identify as, who they love. That is all their business, not mine. And whatever the law says is what the law says on that. In terms of the 1849 law, I've made my position very clear the entire time I've been in this race. My wife and I are blessed, as you said in the introduction, to have 2 daughters that we adopted at birth. We can't have children biologically. And so we are eternally grateful to 2 then 18-year-old young women who 23 and 21 years ago went through the sacrifices. They were still students in school, still living at home, to carry their babies to term and give us a family we can't have biologically. We treasure those women, and because of that, personally, we treasure life even when it's not planned. But judges don't make law. I've been clear on this from along every step of the way. Laws are passed by the legislature. Judges apply them that way. Unless the law is unconstitutional, we don't have any liberty to change that law into our own image. When I put on my robe, I put away my personal views. They become utterly irrelevant, and I follow the law.
How often have your decisions been overturned?
I can think of 2. One was a case, I didn't even handle the sentencing. I handled the post-conviction motions on a challenge about how to count prior OWI convictions. And a man, I think he was a 7th offense. They were counting a refusal, and the state statute says refusals of a evidentiary chemical test count. I followed that statute and sentenced him as a 7th offense. The Supreme Court looked at it and concluded, and I think appropriately, that the counting a refusal is counting an exercise of a constitutional right to not submit to a blood test. Therefore, while we can get a warrant and force your blood, and we can revoke your driver's license for refusing the test, it shouldn't be counted for enhancing your penalties on a future case. And so I agreed with that. But as a circuit court judge, I didn't see it as my role to strike down a statute, because statutes are entitled to a presumption of constitutionality. That I think that decision belongs in the Supreme Court, and I agree with their ultimate decision. The other case was a civil case, and I was reversed in part and upheld in part, and then the parties settled the case, which happens in civil. You can put a lot of work into it, and then they just settle it and it's gone. But I couldn't recall the details on that right now.
What were your accomplishments as Wisconsin Attorney General?
Well, thank you for that question. You know, I got there, and my top priority arriving was to go after the opiate epidemic. I had, as district attorney, met with countless parents who had buried their children, children who had buried their parents. This tragedy was affecting people from all walks of life, from every community. And we created the Dose of Reality campaign that actually ultimately 6 states ended up using lock, stock, and barrel, a prevention and awareness program. When I got there, the DEA had just stopped doing the National Drug Take-Back Days. They stopped coordinating that. We built, sheriffs and police chiefs hit me the moment I won the election. They were on me, Brad, we've got to bring that back. We did. And by April, we were doing the drug take back. And frankly, ever since, Wisconsin's always been in the top 3 states nationwide for our drug take back efforts. I created the Office of School Safety when the tragedy at Parkland, Florida happened on February 14 of 2018. That afternoon, Governor Walker and Lieutenant Governor Clayfish both called me on my cell phone and said, Brad, we've got to be able to say to the citizens of Wisconsin that we're going to do something about this, that we're going to do the best we can to prevent this from happening in our state. And I said, I have good news for you, Governor. Just this morning, I had another meeting with the state police chiefs and sheriffs associations, and we were finalizing a plan to create more safety for our schools. But it wasn't just about hardening the schools. That's your foot in the door to get the schools to talk with you about this. Offer them money so they can make their schools harder to get into for someone who's got murderous intent. But beyond that, you need to look further. I did roundtables in all 72 counties as Attorney General, and we invited law enforcement, other public safety, municipal leaders, judges, and educators. And I heard from teachers all across the state. They know by 5th grade which kid is going to end up in using drugs when they're a teenager, which kid's going to end up locked up later in life. They know because they can see in those kids the trauma they've experienced. But those teachers had nothing to do. They didn't know how to solve the problem. There was no place for them to go. So they felt helpless. Our program required that if you got any of that grant money from this program, you had to commit to send 10% of your education staff to a training on advanced adverse childhood trauma. And those were to become the teach the teachers, so to speak, that went back to the school and implemented those. And you also had to develop as a school safety team made up of law enforcement, educators, and mental health professionals. So when you have a teacher who identifies a child that seems to have something wrong, the teacher has a place to go, and there's someone the teacher can keep teaching their class. That group can work on what do we need to do? Do we need to check into what's going on in this child's house? What's in their history? How have they gotten to this point? We created that, and both houses of the legislature, not unanimously, there were a couple holdouts who thought we should spend more money, but everyone agreed that this was a great plan. So I'll call it unanimous. And ultimately, the initial funding, $100 million that the legislature approved for us to distribute to school districts so they could harden their facilities and get that training to help our kids be safer. I can go on and on. We created the first of its kind in the world officer wellness program. I recognized from my time as district attorney how it affected me emotionally and psychologically, the witnessing what I did day in and day out. I thought, how much more is this to law enforcement officers who arrive at the scene when the bullets might still be flying or other things still happening? And so we created a program that we put in every training, every grant program we did to law enforcement. They had to start building a wellness program so we take care of our officers. We lose 4 times as many to suicide than we do to duty deaths. And I felt we owed it to do something. We created the very first program of its kind in the world. The the International Association of Police Chaplains gave me their President's Award for that work to create a program like that. And it's being replicated now to keep those who protect us safer. I wish I'd had time to get to the firefighters.
Okay, this is our last question. As a Christian, do you support prayer in Wisconsin public schools?
That's an issue that can very much come before the courts. I am a Christian. And I'm not sure exactly what the question means. Do you mean the teacher leads the class in a prayer? No, that comes too close, or that's too much government imposing a religion on citizens. That I don't think is a good idea. But beyond that, I'm not sure how to answer that question. If a child wants to pray privately, well, that's different than a teacher leading the class in prayer. I'm not sure how you'd know necessarily, and unless they did a sign of the cross or something, or had their hands put together in prayer. I don't know. It's a hard question to ask. I apologize, but that's not a simple question. I appreciate the sentiment in asking it, but I'm not sure I can answer that.
And that will conclude our questions because I think we're out of time. So thank you again, Judge Schimel.
Thank you.